الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. We express our praise and gratitude to Allah Ta'ala. We seek blessings on the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Well, if you guys haven't prayed also, maybe we'll pray also.
Yeah.
We have done the day.
Okay.
So we left off toward the end of ayah 186. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. So when my servants ask about you, I am near. Now we've already spoken about this multiple times, but just to finish off the ayah. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So in the context of the passage, meaning the ayahs that come before and after about fasting, one of the points we're making is that the direction that I want to get to in terms of my fasting over the course of the month, and so this timing, mashallah, is really perfect for us to evaluate each of ourselves right now.
Omer, what ayah are you on?
186? Yep. For us to evaluate each of ourselves at this point in Ramadan is, can I say that at this moment, right, here we are at the end of Ramadan, either the final hours, final hour literally, or the final 25 hours, can I say that my relationship with Allah Ta'ala is in any capacity stronger, better, closer than it was just before Ramadan began? Right? That's the simple, basic, but heavy question for.
How is that objectively?
Think about it. So the objective side would be to look at things like my prayers, our donations. Chances are for all of us, to some degree, our donations, especially those of us who are older, our donations are probably more during Ramadan than the previous 30 days before that. Maybe those would be some objective measurements, right? The simple fact of praying 30 days or fasting 30 days automatically is a yes, makes it a yes, right? But in terms of consciousness, things to evaluate would be my sense of well-being, my confidence in my service to Allah Ta'ala, my confidence that Allah Ta'ala is there, is listening to me, is taking care of me, is answering me to my satisfaction, all those things. I mean, I almost always begin Ramadan with a sense of apprehension, like, can I make it through, even though I've done, 35, Ramadans in a row, mashallah. And such was the case even at the beginning, like 5 weeks ago. Like, am I going to be able to make it through? Am I going to mess up? What am I going to do? Right. And one of the points we talked about last time in terms of quote unquote spirituality, am I more clear right now? And this is also partly physiological. Right? Am I more clear in my thinking and the way I look at things? In a month, don't expect necessarily massive life-changing transformations. I'm essentially asking if life is 10 steps in a staircase, have I moved up one step? Okay. And that's the thing to think about, because this is essentially what the whole process is leading to: fasting leading me to taqwa leading me to having a closer relationship with Allah Ta'ala. So on the one side is the condition of my heart, and on the other side is me obeying Allah Ta'ala. I think of them as two sides of the coin, looking internally and then looking in terms of my practice.
So point by point, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So the way that we're evaluating the change in our relationship with Allah would be our confidence in Him, our obedience, so acts of worship, right?
So the objective side would be the acts of worship.
Acts of worship.
What am I fulfilling?
Okay.
Right? The subjective side would be even looking at the acts of worship. What's the level of my concentration? What's the level of my focus, my dedication? And then outside of the acts of worship, everything in between. What am I like? In terms of my interaction with people, in terms of my thoughts about Allah Ta'ala. How much do I think about Allah Ta'ala? I mean, for most of us, it really comes down to either we're thinking about ourselves or we're thinking about Allah Ta'ala. And for most people, we're spending most of the day thinking about ourselves, just as human nature, right? Last week we were saying that at the end of the day, either you're obeying Allah Ta'ala or you're obeying your nafs.
But I think that when you're thinking about yourself, you potentially could just be thinking about Allah Ta'ala because you're thinking about your needs. So then, therefore, you're thinking about where you can have your needs fulfilled, which is going to be Allah Ta'ala. right?
Yeah, I put that as like an in-between point, and you can also reach a point where you have no thought about yourself, and it's all about the hill.
Got it?
That would be ihsan.
Actually, one thing that came in Ramadan this year, I mean, there was a point, I would say, maybe the spring of this year, where I was, in other words, there's this whole thought in this, that we're supposed to be, the idea that the Islamic community, the Ummah is one body out of it, and you kind of get there's a point where you can actually reach a point of disillusionment, where you feel disconnected from the Ummah.
Uh-huh.
And this Ramadan for me has been very much, and maybe, obviously, I think Gaza has a lot to do with it, but in general, it's been much more of a case where I've started worrying or concerning myself more with the Muslims in other parts of the world, which, previously you're just sort of like, okay, now let me just kind of, I don't trust anybody on the way they're practicing their Islam, so therefore I don't associate myself with them. I'm completely different, so I just keep myself isolated. And now it's sort of like, it doesn't matter what those differences are. Concerning myself for them is part of who is part of being a Muslim, whether or not our belief systems necessarily are congruent, so to speak.
Would you suggest that anything else is part of it aside from what's happening in Palestine?
I would say I think that, in other words, I think there is, and I think it just has to do with. When I would, there are certain things I would read, certain things that I would come across, and I sit there and I think to myself, the sort of the mentality that I was going through was wrong. The idea that the thoughts that I was having were mistaken or misplaced. Mm-hmm. And I can't take. Like I said, Gaza is the most tangible thing. I think. But I think there are other instances where I sat there and I thought to myself that the things that I was letting myself getting disillusioned with were the problem. I mean, I'm not those. In other words, those may be problems, and there may be things out there that need reform and need changing. But that's no reason. That's one thing to say that there's a problem; these need to be changed. And it's another thing completely to just say that I'm going to be disillusioned.
Yeah, right. Yeah, those are two different things. It's a good observation. So that's something for each of us to evaluate, literally in maybe the final, 45 minutes or so. I'm just thinking of food. Let's see, somebody else.
No, are we going to have random observations live about the Halal Committee today, as opposed to on Facebook?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm trying not to troll as much anymore. And so I've done a really good job on Facebook since I've come back on. I think no trolling, but okay. So that ayah still fascinatingly comes right in the middle of the ayahs about fasting. It's the next ayah. Uhilla lakum. So it is lawful for you, laylat al-siyam, in the nights of the fast, then to go unto your women and such. The backstory here is that the previous ruling that they had when they were fasting. So first, we were saying that they were fasting just the white days. Then they were fasting Ramadan. But even the Ramadan fast was slightly more strict in some matters. In one manner, and this is fascinating, and I don't know if I quite understand it, but if you took a nap, if you went to sleep after iftar, from that point forward, matters of intimacy and such were then prohibited.
If you what now?
If you went to sleep after iftar.
Okay.
Until the next night. Right. And the problem then is that this was too strict for many people to keep up with, to follow. And so that was then removed. Beyond that, it's I don't find too much of the commentaries in terms of what's going on at the time.
You said that, and that's kind of one of my thoughts, and one of the lessons that I learned after kind of our discussion last week is the notion of balance in everything. That the balance, exactly. And if you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have forbade X, Y, and Z for the entire month of Ramadan. But within 24 hours, he said, just avoid X, Y, and Z for this period of time, but the rest of the time it's completely legitimate, within a 24-hour period, you know? And for me, I've always been one of those people that when I get in the zone, I forget everything around me. You know, like for example, the Arabic class. Like, I felt like I had to spend every single waking moment at home memorizing things, going through it, processing it, just forget everything else. And it was just very like one-sided, you know? That Ramadan kind of helped, or at least just thinking about it now, kind of helped me realize that there's no role for monasticism or no role for being one-sided, and just having a balance is what's important, you know? And just the fast itself, like Allah's telling you, there's nothing wrong with doing X, Y, and Z, but obedience is number one, and then you can do it, but you can only do X, Y, and Z during this time period, you know? So it's pretty powerful.
I think it's also a very, very important lesson. Like when I talk to younger dudes who are like in their 20s and such, and a few too many of them idealize me, right? Because I'm teaching all the time, and I tell them, okay, I'm not following the Sunnah right now. Right now, I'm an extremist by definition, right? Because the ideal is that you're having a family, you're taking care of a family and all that stuff, right? Technically, right now, I'm a monk, right? That's not our tradition, right? And when you can find that balance, that happy medium, then in terms of what our deen prescribes, that is much better.
I just don't know how the Prophet Muhammad did it.
How do you do it with 9 wives at a time?
I have no idea. That's just remarkable. You know?
They all seem to be happy with him.
Yeah. And his kid, and his daughter, and also how
So, in the second sentence of this ayah, right in the middle, we have this ayah that is quoted in very many marriage khutbahs, including just about all of my marriage khutbahs. Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahunna. They are garments for you, and you are garments for them. What does that metaphor mean?
Covering. So going back to that, the idea of being able to cover each other cover each other, security, be it cover each other's faults, be it to provide comfort to you, bring comfort to each other.
It's a comfort also. What else? What else does your clothing do for you? Protects you, absolutely. What else does your clothing do?
Well, it sees the inside of you versus.
Oh, that's really it's basically like you, basically. Your person.
Like it's perfectly made to fit you. Yeah, absolutely. It
Adorns
also
you.
beautifies you.
Adorns you.
Yeah.
Good stuff, you guys.
So this is essentially the prescribed relationship. Allah is aware that you're deceiving yourselves, and He's turning a rahmah towards you. Again, this relates to the strict rule about going to sleep after you break your iftar. So, and then do what Allah Ta'ala has allowed, and eat and drink until the white thread becomes distinct from you from the black thread. So there was a companion who was actually looking at 2 threads to figure out if it's Fajr time yet. And then he was told, no, that's not what this means. This means the whiteness of the sky when that appears.
There's still people back in the old country who think that's what, the
totally.
the Sahri time as opposed to Fajr time. That is when you can see the difference between a white thread and a black thread.
So. There's also, you find in the commentaries, there's this one line about the Prophet, peace be upon him, allowed people to keep eating their suhoor during and past the adhan of Bilal. Okay? And then later people incorrectly took that to mean that, okay, if you haven't finished your suhoor, you can keep eating it until you're done, even if it's like way into Fajr time. Okay? But the argument given is that Bilal radiallahu anhu would often make his adhan for Fajr early. Because the people also have to wake up and everything, right? The Iqamah is the Iqamah time. But the actual time to get everybody up, as-salat khayrun min an-nawm, so sleep is better than, or a prayer is better than sleep. So he would often pray it early. And then his adhan was compared to Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Who's he?
He was a blind man who was another muazzin, and he gave the second khutbah. They said you can keep eating until the time
He's also at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yes.
You know, Abasa wa Tawalla.
Was he the guy who like covered for the prophet whenever he went like out? Or, no, that wasn't.
So was Abi.
Oh. Okay.
He's famous for a few other stories. Abasa wa Tawalla, he frowned and turned away, is about him.
Was it?
Oh.
Oh, that was the blind man.
Yeah.
And he was a mu'adhin.
He was Mu'adhin.
Oh, I didn't realize
Now
that.
think about this, he's the Mu'adhin,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
How's he gonna know it's Fajr time?
He won't. Yeah, that's true.
Because
Somebody tells him.
He has a phone, smartphone.
Because he's no. The Fajr might become apparent through other means, but primarily it's the sun. He also, during battles, would be the one who would hold the flag.
What was his name again? Birds.
Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Could be related to the birds. I don't know how many birds they had back then, but they must have had some birds to protect the Kaaba. But in any case, I always found that fascinating. So, I'm sorry? Someone want to say something?
I was saying the bird, sorry.
No, you go.
No, no.
I was thinking maybe he would be like something to do with like warm or
Could
something.
be.
No, just I was repeating the bird thing because the birds actually do start singing exactly at such a time.
Really?
Really?
I would know I'm not awake at it. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Yeah. No. Because I was up all night doing the tahajjud and then I prayed. No, anyway, so. So another big line that extends beyond this ayah. These are the hudud of
So is
Allah.
that, one
I'm sorry,
question.
go
So
ahead.
when the bird starts, does it mean the Fajr's over? Or is it
No,
It's
dawn.
during Fajr time.
Really?
When it
Because
starts.
I always feel like, for me, the actual sound of the birds comes like half an hour,
Sunrise.
45 minutes later. Really? For sunrise?
No, it might be. I could be wrong.
Do you think that it could just be your azan clock with the birds and the waterfall?
No, if I, like, unless I remember incorrectly, I set my alarm for the beginning of Fajr time, and if my windows are open, it's the birds that wake me up.
You think maybe the azan is waking up the birds? And then,
Before the other.
okay.
You guys know what azan I'm talking about, right? With the birds and the waterfall.
with the
But I
bird?
could be
No,
mistaken.
no, okay.
Oh, I have that on my
Oh
phone.
yeah,
I think that's
okay.
what-
Now I know what you're talking about.
So hydro, man.
Yeah, with the-
Find out again.
Okay. Another big ayah that is another big phrase or sentence that is taken from this ayah. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. So these are the hudud of Allah, and do not come near them. So the hudud being the limits. And so a general prescription that is taken, extracted from this, although I think this phrase comes quite a few other times in the Quran, in the context of divorce and one other thing that I'm forgetting right now.
Where's the hudud Allah?
It's like the second to the last sentence, third to the
Okay.
last sentence. Yeah. And so, as a general principle, add that to the issue of suhoor, meaning it's prescribed that, okay, if your limit, the end time of suhoor is this minute, okay, the recommendation is not that you eat until that minute, okay, and earlier, right, play it safe. And then by extension, all the other the prohibitions that Allah Ta'ala gives us to not bring yourself to the edge where you're almost doing the crime, but to keep yourself distant, right? So for example, the easy thing would be drinking booze. So obviously we don't drink booze, but then you will even have commentators who will say that, all right, you shouldn't go to a place that serves alcohol, okay? Or some will even go so far as to say that, like, the alcohol section of a grocery store, you shouldn't even walk through, right? I mean, how far you want to take it is up to you, but the basic idea being, don't come near the limits.
So the staying for worship in the mosques, that's the kafir part?
That's it, the God, well, Akifin, yeah.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks.
Okay, then the topic changes.
That's
Assalamu alaikum.
88.
That 188.
Okay. Sound good.
وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not eat your wealth among each other, so don't swallow up each other's wealth in falsehood. وَتُدْلُوا بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ. with essentially the goal, the direction of using it to influence judges. لتأكلوا فريقا من أموال الناس بالإثم وأنتم تعلمون. Is then you will be devouring in sin. Then you'll be devouring in sin knowingly. So here, just looking at the general topic, it's pretty straightforward. You know, don't use your wealth for what purpose?
Don't bribe, basically.
Yeah, essentially don't bribe, right? And this connects to an ayah, one of the very first ayahs that the Prophet, peace be upon him, received. Let's go to Surah Al-Muzammil. Is that 73, 74? 73? Wait, is it 73 or is it 74? Surah.
73.
Yeah, that is 73, but I think actually I want Surah Mudathir. Yeah, let's go to Surah Mudathir.
That's right before, right?
Before or after? 74.
After that.
يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجس فاهجر ولا تمنن تستكثر. Okay.
I'm sorry, what surah number is that?
Surah 74.
So you start from the top.
Okay.
And so I just read all the way up to ayah, was
Number
it 6? Yeah, 6. So this the Prophet received shortly after his first moments of revelation, right? He runs home and he asks his wife, Zamiluni, Zamiluni, cover me up, like as though he's going into shock, right? And so he's wrapped up in these blankets. According to one school, he has no idea what's going on, so he thinks he's might have lost his mind, might have gotten possessed or something. According to another school, it's just the shock of the experience that he's dealing with, although he knows exactly what's happening. So then he receives these ayahs, you who's wrapped up, arise and warn, and magnify your Lord, purify your clothes. Here it says shun pollution, but basically, yeah, shun filth. Yeah. And do not give favors seeking some return, some worldly return. And then to complete the passage, وَلِرَبِّكَ فَاصْبِرْ, and persevere for the sake of your Rabb. These are, after Iqra, these are the first sets of instructions he receives. And some commentators say this is the actual moment he becomes a prophet. First he receives Iqra, but he's technically, some say, and this is really technical argument, he's not technically a prophet yet, right? Now he's been given the assignment to go and warn people. But in there, how do all these relate to being a prophet, a warner? Arise and warn, okay, straightforward. Magnify your Lord, okay, it's straightforward. And then some also read that as not just praising Allah Ta'ala, but establishing a society where Allah Ta'ala is superior. You know? But what about cleaning your clothes, shunning pollution, and don't give favors seeking some sort of favor in return? How does that relate?
It's be an example, right?
Yeah, it's one part of it is the da'wah, the other part of it is the character.
Is it also, oftentimes when we look at someone, we characterize them based on like status and like male, female, based on their clothing, you know?
Absolutely.
So it also says something about their means of acquisition of what
Sophia,
they're
go get your
wearing.
shoes.
And it says they represent themselves through their clothes.
Absolutely.
So purify your intention, therefore manifested in your clothing and what you present to other people.
So this is something just very, very human. That when we see someone, in that split second, we're going to see how they're dressed, and we're going to make assumptions. Can't escape it, right? You can override it. You can override it so that when you see someone dressed a particular way and you're thinking negatively, you can override that, right? But when you see someone dressed, you're going to make assumptions about their socioeconomic status. You're going to make assumptions about their education level, their culture, and you're definitely going to make assumptions about their cleanliness.
It's just I'm trying to follow the progression of these ideas, you know.
Okay.
So first of all, Iqra was the entire story was revealed all at once.
First 5 ayahs.
Only the first 5 ayahs were revealed. Okay.
Yeah.
So then there was a hiatus, right?
This hiatus might be half an hour.
Oh, okay,
So he
fine.
receives that, then he runs home.
Yeah.
And then while he's wrapped up, either that very night or in those nights,
Then Mudathir came.
Mudathir and Muzammil.
And then what about the rest of the surah?
I forgot who that's referring to from Makkah.
Yeah.
I want to say it's Walid ibn Mughira, but I might be confusing that with the ayahs in the beginning of Al-Baqarah.
So,
Yeah.
so the first 5 ayahs, then Mudathir and Muzammil, was the second time, and this
So
is
it's like
literally-
the first part of Mudathir and the first parts of Muzammil. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. And
Yeah.
so if Surah Al-Baqarah was done much like it could have been any other time, it's nowhere near.
You know,
Would
3
not-
years
would
later,
not-
4 years later.
Okay, got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So-
and then also the progression of ideas here. So you cover, like, obviously his Khadija was covering him up, and the clothing thing is still an uncleanliness avoid. So I mean, I understand it's important to wear good clothing and so on, and why was that brought up though? Why was that such a high priority?
I think it's speaking to something about human nature,
Mhm.
right? What color did the Prophet often wear?
Green.
He often wore white,
White,
right?
yes.
I mean, we also have narrations that his izar, which we call a lungi, he had like a red striped one that he often wore, which I still think is fascinating. But often when we think of him, when we think of Isa alayhi salam, we think of him dressed in white, right? And again, clothing, the way you present yourself without saying anything does affect people,
Yeah.
right? And so I think this is
I mean, like he was already wearing clean clothes, I'm sure.
it's
right?
fair to assume, yeah.
Yeah. So why would that be?
Well, I mean, this then becomes also an instruction for everyone else who is a da'i,
Oh, I see. Okay.
right? You know, or it is emphasizing this. I mean, there's probably other things that he automatically did that did not have to be mentioned, but the clothing
Oh, I
aspect.
see. Okay.
Or is there a metaphorical component? I know there's more than just the physical garments that
That's what I'm
the way he's
referring to,
presenting. The way he presents himself to the world, make sure that you're presenting yourself in the pure, in
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you add that to the next ayah, you know, so shun the pollution.
And Yusuf always in the footnote says that this is a reference also to like being like dirt and trash being thrown on him.
Oh, I
himself.
see. Okay.
I mean, that would happen later on, and so maybe he's being given a prophecy here too.
Yeah. Interesting.
So maybe a way to shake off insults.
the.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Interesting that this is one instance, and then the Surah Mutaffifin is another instance where.
Let's take a look.
Sorry.
Let's take a look.
Or just the first ayah. وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا اكْتَالُوا عَلَى النَّاسِ يَسْتَوْفُونَ وَإِذَا كَالُوهُمْ أَوْ وَزْنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. That woe to the stinters, those who give less in measure and weight, decreasing the rights of others. Those who, when it's time for them to demand, ask for their full measure, and when they have to give by measure, give less than what is due.
Yeah.
So this is something that right early on in Islamic history wasn't, even though we like to say it was about just about Tawheed and it was about the day of judgment, heaven and hell, that right from the beginning in very early surah, very early revelations, the rights of others were also a point of emphasis.
Yeah, very, very important point. So, the part of the da'wah is, as we mentioned, tawheed, and part of it is essentially what we would call good character. And so, in terms of the context of the ayah that we're looking at, and so when you are being generous to people, do not be generous to the people with the intention that they should be doing something back for you. Or if that's what your intention is, be clear that that's what your intention is. Right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. What's the difference in attitude, in approach, in intention when you are giving to someone something with no expectation in return, or you're giving to someone something hoping that they also do you a favor?
You're doing it for Allah, or you're doing it for yourself?
Okay. And what else? What else are differences? Yes, sir.
Well, sometimes, if you're expecting something in return but they don't give it to you, you can get angry,
Yeah, absolutely.
jealous, that sort of stuff.
That if you're doing favors to a person, hoping even that they think of you more positively, you're asking for something in return, right? And when you don't get that, then you feel like it's a failed investment,
Yeah.
right? You feel like I just wasted my donation, my money, or whatever it is that I've done. As opposed to when you're giving just out of service to Allah Ta'ala, love for Allah Ta'ala, love for Allah Ta'ala's creation, all those things, then
You'll
as soon,
always feel great.
inshallah, yeah, then you're automatically getting that benefit. Yeah. Very good. And the transaction ends. You're not looking for anything beyond that. Okay, how does that play out in relationship to the ayahs on fasting? What's the relationship between this ayah? Don't eat up each other's wealth to influence judges. How does that relate to fasting?
So just the use of the word without ta'kulu, in other words.
So one is just don't eat.
Yeah, in other words, if you can restrain yourself from things that are legal, this should be an obvious guide to you that the idea that you can eat up what is clearly not allowed to you, not permitted to you.
Mm-hmm.
We've permitted things. We've permitted everything. We've even permitted you to have relations with your spouse during the month of fasting. So this is something that's obviously illegal. Stay away from it. Don't even come close to it.
And also, if we're doing the fast, is one form of obedience, which is, I think, the other one that I pointed out last week, is purely for Allah. There's no, you can cheat and do all this stuff behind closed doors, and but when you're during fasting, the only person that's watching is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the only intent. That's the center of why you're doing it. So similarly, it's the same thing here, that when you're doing something and you're doing it for the intention of pleasing Allah as opposed to pleasing yourself, the center of the attention for why you're doing it is to gain pleasure.
You also made a huge point in there about how this is related. If you're bribing a judge, you're not going to be doing it openly.
Yeah, right.
You're going to be doing it secretly, right? And so we're saying here, this whole section, going back at least to ayah 177, is about character, right? And so we're connecting fasting with the way you're taking control of yourself, and part of that is taking control of your character. Not just in your public behavior, but also your private behavior, right? That if you're doing something shady, why do we call it shady? Right? Because you're doing it in the darkness, you're doing it secretly. See, I'm cool, I guess I use words like this. Yeah. Right. And thus, that if I'm serving Allah Ta'ala, then I should be comfortable in following His rules. Okay, next ayah, about the new moons.
That's we're eagerly waiting for it.
Exactly. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ. So they ask you about, like, Hilla would essentially be like the crescent of the new moon. What do you call the full moon? All of you know this.
We talked about it, but I still don't remember.
Badr. Right. Yeah, that's essentially like yeah.
Perfect timing.
Seriously. Yeah. You're still fasting, right? Yeah. Anyway, so they ask you about the new moons. These are affixed seasons. Mawaqit, miqat, linnas wal hajj. And for hajj, we'll talk about the hajj aspect and such in just a moment. وَلَيْسَ الْبِرَّ لِأَنَّ تَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتِ مِنْ ظُهُورِهَا. So it is not righteous that you enter houses by the backs. وَلَكِنَّ الْبِرَّ مَنِ اتَّقَى. But righteousness is that you have taqwa. وَأَتُوا الْبُيُوتِ مِنْ أَبْوَابِهَا. So come into houses through their doors. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. Have taqwa of Allah, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that you'll be successful. Okay, about the new moons. Oh, temptation.
We're already eating it.
They're already what?
Eating the pizza.
Really?
Good for them.
They're not fasting?
It's fine.
No, I told the little kids if they want to eat.
Yeah.
That's good for them. Don't bother them.
Hey, let them.
That way they're not bothering us.
Exactly.
I'll make sure I have some pizza. Okay.
Say one pizza for us.
So again, on the surface, look at all the things that are stated in this ayah. New moons, entering houses, and then taqwa. Putting these three things together, what does this ayah seem to be about? The purpose of the moons is to designate months. When you enter houses, you should enter them through their doors, not through the back doors. I mean, not through the proper doors, not through the back entrance. And have taqwa of Allah. What is this ayah speaking about?
Don't rob your neighbors. I don't know.
Yes.
Few people, they come in.
It's about superstition,
Superstition.
right? Because what else would you use the moon and all those things for, especially the stars in the sky? You use it for the zodiac, for astrology, and to somehow get some inside information. I'm sorry?
We're not that far in history, in Islamic history yet, where we start to learn astrology and everything.
You're thinking astronomy, not astrology.
Astronomy.
I don't think you're gonna learn, but you should ever learn.
It's okay, it's the end of the fast.
So this ayah is actually, so in terms of Nashin, what you missed.
Yeah, thank you.
There are three key things mentioned in this ayah. One is the moons, one is entering houses through the proper entrance, and the other is have taqwa. So what is this ayah about overall? It's about superstition. That the purpose of the moon is to designate the months. Meaning the purpose of the moon is not to give you some inside information about the way of the world and all that. Right? Which is what people often use astrology for.
Yeah.
And then there was this superstition that I think still you find all across the world about not entering your house through the front door, enter through the side, enter through the back. Why?
That we always do, you know, we don't come.
No,
I think now we enter through the garage very often,
Yeah,
right?
that's
No,
what
something.
That,
Except for the guests, you know.
yeah.
Might also mean following the proper procedure.
What?
So this is what I would say. Putting all of this together would absolutely be this point.
Yeah,
Right?
discipline.
This is the function of the doorway of the house. It is one of the philosophical points of Sharia, as well as one of the philosophical points of adab. Like the word adab itself literally means to put things in their proper place. That's basically what it's saying. Adab in practice means what? Politeness, to be cultivated in your character. Likewise, justice, qist. There's two words for justice. One is adab, the other one is qist. Qist is often referred to the same thing, putting everything in its proper place. That's just. Yeah. And thus, you enter houses the proper way, the way the house was designed, and such.
So it's a metaphor in a way, or is that, or was it like a physical phenomenon that they would superstition?
The people would enter through the side door, back door.
So that was
Part of it was to prevent envy of people. Right.
prevent envy. How was that?
Something about, people can see into your house from the front, so don't show that. So just enter to the side. Yeah.
That is, and specifically at the time of the new moon, though, correct? Because that's what it implies.
Could be. I
seems-
never read it that way, but I mean, putting all
In other
this
words,
together.
because why are they asking about the moons? They're asking about the moons because the moons are meant for establish your months, do Hajj by them. Don't be you're sitting there thinking, okay, now there's a new moon, now you got to go around the side. You can't go around the front door. Otherwise,
There
they're
was
going to ask.
perhaps some relationship like that I'm not aware of. Yeah. I mean that reminds me your point. Well, he reminds me also of this time when there was an eclipse when the son of the Prophet peace be upon him died, right? And there was a concern that there's some relationship with the Prophet peace be upon him. Essentially, paraphrasing, saying no, one is the way Allah designs the world, and this is the son's death. There's no relationship between the two.
Maududi says one superstition that the Arabs had once they entered a state of consecration for pilgrimage. They did not enter their houses by the door. They would climb over walls, go into windows, go in the back. It was a superstition thing around Hajj.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What would be the equivalent that we find in our community these days of superstitious type behaviors or behaviors that are being criticized here?
The evil eye.
So the evil eye, especially the weird things that might be done to protect against the evil eye, right? The evil eye itself is generally looked at as a real thing, but take a piece of coal and then, draw a line or whatever that is, now you're protected. I don't have any foundation for that.
I could get in trouble for this, but
Go for it.
Tying a tawis around your neck, hoping that those will protect you.
Dun, 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 dun.
I know.
Folding the corner of the Johnny Mars, so the shaitan won't.
Absolutely.
So it's just
Let
kind
the
of
shaitan doesn't pray.
Let him pray. Let the shaitan pray already.
He's been wanting to
Let the shaitan pray, man.
Let's more guys let him pray.
You know,
I thought it was something from play on.
Sometimes when you pray, you have said, well,
Oh,
That was
is
our
it
uncle
Yeah,
saying.
yeah,
pray.
I'm sorry?
when you pray, I mean, sometimes people don't leave a gap in between, otherwise the shaitan
Should I
will
come
come
through?
Which is
Yeah.
good.
They're actually, there you can say,
Is that superstition?
that's a text, that's real. Yeah.
That's real.
Okay. Okay, how about,
Why would shaitan come and pray?
Yeah, exactly.
and if
The way that's understood is more like starting a fight between
Yeah.
two people. But some people go overboard,
They
it's
will
like
touch your feet.
everything is connected.
Put them
Yeah.
on the side.
Somebody here was saying something? No,
eating the fish and drinking milk?
What's
Or
this?
white
Well,
spots?
that's biological.
White spots, is
White
that
spots
cause
on
obvious?
your-
Yeah, that's not superstition. That's
What's the deal?
that's medical.
This is
What medical
no.
superstition
We
is
can
that?
we're drawing. Now she is drawing into a well that she has available to her from a certain part of her family, where she can draw all these superstitions, like you don't cut your fingernails after
After
Maghrib.
Yeah, that's
Really?
what they used to say.
You don't believe that stuff, man?
See, the funny thing is, I was not referring to any of those things.
Yeah, some people cover the mirror with a cloth, right?
Oh, yeah.
She covered the mirror.
You do that?
Chadar, so
I have never seen that.
evils
Oh, okay.
actually don't come out.
Okay.
Never seen that.
So, I'm referring to all those other things that we add in the deen without foundation. Right. Sometimes it is a concern to be extra correct, right? And so we add a lot of limitations that aren't there. Right. And then over the course of 200 years, then I think it results in a lot of these behaviors that we're talking about.
Here at the Surah Al-Alim, what it says is, it is not devoutness for you to enter the houses by the back in Ihram. I think this is what Umar was referring to. The Meccan custom before Islam was to make an entrance by which they entered and left from the backs of their houses without using the door. They did that claiming it was devoutness to do so. And then it says, rather, devoutness is possessed by those who are God-fearing and so on. It has nothing to do with where you enter.
I thought it was something to do with just propriety. Like if there are people in the house, you want to enter
From the
in
front,
a
yeah.
manner
Yeah.
where somebody knows you're coming in case they have to run and change or whatever.
See, I don't know how the old houses, like at the time of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the way that we think of the front of the house and the back of the house, was it the same kind of?
Or not significantly different.
That's what, yeah.
I mean, the biggest fundamental difference is that in our houses today, you psychologically have much more private space, right?
Yeah.
Just because the way everything's sealed off.
Is it definitely a literal meaning rather than a metaphorical one?
It's all these in this particular ayah, I'd say, are definitely literal and metaphorical. But what do you think
What I'm
about?
thinking is when you approach someone, approach them openly, rather than for a purpose or, like just open them honestly and openly.
I think
That's what I'm thinking.
that works in terms of here. I mean,
Yeah.
the metaphorical readings of this ayah are very, very fascinating. Unfortunately, some of them are completely inappropriate for this audience, so I can't share what they are. But metaphors included.
It's like when I leave.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I think we get it.
I haven't told Omer to share them all. But the point being that that this ayah is loaded both not just with the literal readings, but with multiple metaphors. Sorry. So the third part being taqwa is essentially what your goal is in terms of proper conduct, the conduct of taqwa. لعلكم تفلحون, so that you'll be successful. Because think about how this plays out. Another thing that would be equivalent, like when you're following superstitions, the psychology is often that you have a shortcut to success, right? Same thing with belief in conspiracy theories. That somehow you have an inside track to the truth through this conspiracy theory. One of my students, who's kind of more of a renegade student, he posted on Facebook, this video that is confirming that Israel shot down that Malaysian plane above Ukraine the same day that they started the siege and everything. And maybe it's all true, but when we take that as more true, as opposed to other things, that when we believe the conspiracy over other things, that's the part that I'm focusing on. Right? as though you have some inside information. Because if I believe in a conspiracy theory, then I also have to believe that the conspirators might have also invented the conspiracy theory. See what I'm saying? You know, whether we talk about 9/11 or something, I mean, there's definitely a whole lot of holes in the 9/11 story.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no doubt about that. Right? But then I also have to believe that the conspiracy theories might have also been invented by the same people who are doing the conspiracies. That's to take it to its full conclusion. I think that would be something else you also find very commonly in our community, that conspiracy theories are a type of superstition.
I mean, it depends on what you're calling conspiracy theories. It may be the truth.
But the point is that it may.
Yeah.
It's presented as if it is the truth, and if you and you're naive and stupid if you don't believe this conspiracy theory to be the truth.
Yeah.
Or you're sheep, right? That you
Right,
bought
exactly.
into the mainstream, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we definitely should be skeptical of pretty much any news report we hear.
Yes.
Right. I mean, just like there's the whole story about ISIS, you know, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and what they were doing to the women, and they turned out it's all a big hoax.
The whole FGM story.
That was so bizarre. Like,
It makes you
Propaganda.
question all the
like
stories.
the most bizarre
So-
story I've
That's right.
ever heard. They were like 20,000 women, and like what they were saying too.
I think it also like takes focus away from trusting the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I have some friends who are like really into astrology, okay? Like super
I
into
am
it.
so surprised you have friends who are really into astrology.
They're like so into it to the point where it's like, I don't even know. So they're like, on this day I have to avoid this, and like this is what it relates to, and it's so complicated. And it kind of distracts from like trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also like,
Absolutely.
you're putting trust into like the weird, like stuff that doesn't have any necessary, like it's not founded. But some of it might be true in terms of what you see,
Might be.
but
but-
that may be coincidence.
Yeah.
Or the way your perspective, like you choose to see that because you see it that way. So you find the, the coincidences.
You should send your friends, these friends, oh, these are not friends, you're just
These are
acquaintances. Okay, but you should send them to the astrology page on the Onion's website, because it's like all the predictions are like, and you're just going to die today, right? That's, yeah.
Well, there's
If you're a
also,
Scorpio, you're going to die. So, somebody here was saying something? Nipper?
you know, just looking at the ayah and then hearing what we're talking about with regard to superstition and, you know, conspiracy theory, you know, and relating it to taqwa, you know, if you have taqwa, right, and you take Allah as your shield, compare that to like all of this other like bizarre stuff. Like if you walk around in a state of suspicion and superstition,
Exactly.
it's coming from it's a fear-based mentality, right?
Versus trust.
Easy for shaitan and anybody else to manipulate. If you're coming from a place of taqwa, then you're solid.
Yeah,
And you
to
deal
mess
with
with you.
what is reality right here and now, you know, visible and also what you understand, but it's clear.
Which is a perfect segue into the next ayah. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. And fight in the way of Allah, those who fight you, but do not essentially initiate things. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah Ta'ala does not love those who initiate hostilities. Oh God.
That's just for transgressors, but isn't it more like aggressor? Or
I would understand as aggressors.
yeah.
That's like that's why I was doing. I think that's why I was translating as transgress.
Mu'tadin? I don't think
Yeah,
it's-
like adad, like from like numbers almost. Oh, you know, exceeding in numbers.
Yeah.
Ta'dad in Urdu is sort of a similar.
Exceeding
Yeah,
numbers, those are
exactly. So.
Which is
So that way it becomes transgress makes more linguistic sense there because you're actually exceeding the bounds of what you're allowed.
But that's
So-
what I does. This is atad.
So so then in the context of fighting, the first step of exceeding the bounds would be to start the fight. It's like, how does that relate to the previous ayah and everything else here? The word here is qatilu, so we can't even say, well, this is jihad. Jihad means struggle. No, this is qital. Yeah.
Allah is setting the rules.
Okay. So part of character, then, like when essentially would you be fighting? When would fighting be involved?
If you're being fought against.
Okay.
Well, if a
And-
dispute comes and it's not resolvable, I mean, because it says earlier, do not like bribe in order to gain advantage.
So all of these are different facets within society of character.
Also power, when there's
And
power.
power would be very much part of
money, all that
characters.
kind of stuff, yeah.
Oh, scary. Okay.
Baseball.
That'd be cool. Well, not if it was like a bird. Let's look at these next few ayahs all together, and then it'll make sense, inshallah. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So fight in the way of Allah, and those who fight against you, they do not initiate or do not transgress. Allah Ta'ala does not love those people who initiate or transgress. And then, famous ayah, kill them wherever you find them. Drive them out from wherever they drove you out. Fitna wal-fitnatu ashaddu min al-qatl. Fitna is worse than killing. Okay. Commonly translated as oppression is worse than murder. وَلَا تُقَاتِلُوهُمْ عِنْدَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. And so do not fight them in Masjid al-Haram, so meaning in front of the Kaaba. حَتَّى يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ فِيهِ. Until or unless they fight you there, fight you in the precincts. Okay. فَإِنْ قَاتَلُوكُمْ فَاقْتُلُوهُمْ. And if they fight you, then you kill them. وَكَذَلِكَ جَزَاءُ الْكَافِرِينَ. And this is the reward of the kafirs. Man, heavy duty stuff. But if they desist, فَإِنْ انْتَهَوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Allah is forgiving, merciful. Which means what? If they desist, then you desist. God will forgive them. Okay. Then the next ayah. وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً. Fight them until there is no fitna anymore. وَيَكُونَ الدِّينَ لِلَّهِ. And deen is only for Allah. And if they desist, فَلَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. Then there should be no hostility except against the zalims. All right, I mean, there's more, but let's look at all this. In fact, here, let's finish off with 194. الشهر الحرام بالشهر الحرام والحرمات قصاص. So, the forbidden month for the forbidden month, all things are in retaliation. فَمَنْ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ. So, if they cross the lines with you, if they're aggressive with you, you become aggressive with them. بِمِثْلِ, the way they were. مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ, the way they were crossing lines with you. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. And have taqwa of Allah. Remember, Allah is with those who have taqwa. All right. So now the heavy duty stuff. Fighting. Put all of this together, and what are some principles that you can derive?
I think it's establishing like a just war, I guess.
So there's definitely a just war theory.
Yeah.
The point to think about is that every tradition has some sort of rules, regulations, and some capacity on fighting. And when they don't have that, it means that they have no prohibitions. This is an important point to think about in terms of the way belief systems play out. So a lot of times we have this notion that Christianity is a religion all about peace and love. But until St. Augustine came around in the 400s, there was no prohibition against fighting. Okay? Jesus is definitely saying that, all right, someone hits you, give them the other cheek. If you even look wrong at someone, pluck your eye out, right? So this is the behavior. The behavior that Jesus is prescribing in the Gospels is what we would speak of essentially as ihsan. He's speaking of calling people to perfect behavior. I don't know why I just said this. Oh, perfect behavior. Okay. But otherwise, if you really put it into practice, there's no prohibitions on almost anything. In Judaism, you do have very, very severe rules on war. Right? In Buddhism, you have very severe rules on war that a lot of times people don't realize are even remotely there. Again, we also have rules on fighting.
So I think what from Mohi was saying, it sets a standard for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is establishing as the right way to respond if you're being oppressed.
Okay.
That you know, some of the stories that we hear of these Israeli soldiers, we can make the argument that they're just following directions from their superiors and they're doing what they're supposed to do. But if they go around and they're going above and beyond, and they're hurting people or they're doing things that are vile, that's what they're doing on their own. You know, so these ayahs are kind of setting the standard for whatever's being done to you. Don't exceed that in terms of your aggression towards them. But I think kill them where you find all of that. That's all the fitna that was created for during the conquest of Mecca, when of course they were asked not to do Hajj, even though they came. How many weeks does it take to go from Medina to Mecca? You know, at the time on camel, it's like 2-3 weeks, right? And you're coming with the Ihram to do Hajj, and they're saying that they can't do it. Right?
That's context here is because there was no fighting then.
Yeah, it's like at the year of Hudaybiyah, right? Is that?
Yeah, but
This is much earlier than
this is before Badr.
This is before Badr.
Yeah.
So the first principle to take from all of this is that fighting is an exception, right? That the default is not fighting, which is.
How do you read the ayah like that? Because I wasn't aware.
Because I don't know of any passage that prescribes fighting except in the context of responding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't
Well,
these.
okay, well let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Surah Tawbah.
Boy, what time is Iftar?
We have 6-7 minutes.
Okay, go for it. Okay.
Surah Tawbah. But
Because I also want us to have extra long time to make our duas, because this might be the last one. Okay, go ahead.
But so where there's now it's because those who previously violated their treaties against you, you're no longer obliged to keep your treaties with them.
Sure.
Anybody who kept their treaties with you, they're still good. And that's actually one thing that's always interesting. It comes in Surah Tawbah, that anytime there's a permission given to fighting, there's always sort of the reins are also pulled in a little bit, that make sure you're not going beyond your bounds. If there's somebody who's honored their commitments to you, keep your commitments. But at the same time, there is also this idea that yes, there are times you're allowed to fight, and in those times, as long as you're justified, don't hold back. So for example, slay them where you may find. If there are people who are actually out to get you and they're actually fighting you, then don't be reticent in that fight. As long as you don't exceed bounds, as long as you're going against those who have violated your rights. But once you get into beyond, but at the same time, to a Tawbah, it seems like there is sort of a time where it's actually, it wasn't in response, per se, to a specific incident.
I would say a key point would be the context of Surah Tawbah speaking of, which is when you're dominant. Right? Because Surah Tawbah begins by basically saying, all right, you got 4 months to believe or get out. Right? Everything is off after 4 more, it might be 5 months, right, in the first few ayahs. And so Surah Tawbah is basically speaking of after the conquest of Makkah. And so that context is a very aggressive context. Here, we're speaking with someone who's not in a position of dominance.
What weren't these verses? Wasn't this the first time that the Muslim community was at a place where they could now become? They weren't allowed to fight back, and now these verses. That was my understanding.
And Surah Al-Hajj would be those verses primarily.
Like this, that's what this. The kill them whenever was the authority to say, don't start, but once you do.
Then you get to
finish the job. You have to be decisive.
You have to go all the way, yeah.
Because it's almost worse to go halfway.
Their instruction originally was kufu aydiyakum, which is essentially restrain your hands. So no matter what happens to you, no matter what they do to you, act as though your hands are tied, right? And then this is now changing it.
When is that?
When is which part? I don't remember, but it's not the same sort. This is early Makkah.
So the Surah Tawbah does abrogate the stuff that's in this ayah.
Meaning, let's because I'm thinking too much right now about Iftar. Let's table all this. Sorry, let's table all this until our next meeting, inshallah. Because this is a mini ayah discussion. Inshallah. Is it time? Because I just got the announcement.
I have like 3 or 4 more minutes. I don't know.
8:17.
Okay, so And this may be the final iftar of Ramadan, so just I'll do the initial one and then all of us start.
Sarah.
Well, maybe, we don't know.
Sarah.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت